Now, we must remember that at the centre of this story, for all of its geopolitical and financial relevance, is a network of victims of a man dubbed the most dangerous sexual predator in history by one of the lawyers who represented over 200 of his survivors. Jeffrey Epstein used the money he earned from business dealings not just to commit crimes of sexual violence, but to get away with them. His business and political correspondence was defined by sleaze containing pornographic images and sexualized jokes made at women's expense. But as you will repeatedly read in the media coverage, the files do not suggest any wrongdoing by those named. Epstein's survivors may beg to differ.
I was only 17. I was on my own and I needed help.
I distinctly remember him smiling and enjoying the fact that he was doing this horrible thing to me that obviously terrified me and was violating.
I call it the Cheshire cat grin because his face just went like this.
Epstein not only sexually abused her, but directed her to have sex with other powerful men.
The shame was immediate. I remember sitting at the bottom of my shower and crying my eyes out. And I thought, well, maybe this is just how the world works. If abuse is so prevalent in my life, maybe that's just what it is. That's just life.
By the time I was being raped, it was too late.
I'd say 16 and a half or 17. He's like, you're too old. I don't want you anymore.
Jeffrey Epstein told me what he was into, and it's beyond what I've seen or heard from other victims and interviews. These are unnamed girls. He disclosed that he traveled to foreign countries to commit illicit acts with children.
When the US Department of Justice released millions of files in January, Deputy US Attorney Todd Blance indicated it wouldn't lead to any additional criminal charges. In light of survivor testimonies like the ones you've just heard, what does that say? And what does it say that amid millions of redactions in the files, survivors said that they found their names and personal information while those of their abusers were hidden? At a congressional hearing on Wednesday, US lawmakers joined survivors, accusing the DOJ of hiding potential perpetrators, and their accusations point to the highest levels of global power.
There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime.
Donald Trump attended various parties with Jeffrey Epstein. I want to know, were there any underage girls at that party or at any party that Trump attended with Jeffrey Epstein?
This is so ridiculous, and that they are trying to deflect from all the great things Donald Trump has done. There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows that. This has been the most transparent presidency. He's the one that asked that those files.
I'm reclaiming my time. I got your answer. You said there's no evidence.
Trump asked
Chairman, please stop the clock. Stop the clock.
The legislation.
I'm going to put up another document from a witness who called the FBI's National Threat Operations Center, because I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I believe you just lied under oath, and this is all on videotape. You said there's no evidence of a crime. I'm showing you, here is a witness statement who called into the FBI's Threat Operations Center. He drove Donald Trump around in a limo. He overheard what Donald Trump said to Jeffrey on his cell phone. He was so angry, he was gonna stop the limo and hurt Donald Trump. And he met a girl who said she was raped by Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. She later had her head blown off, and officers at the scene said that could not have been suicide. No one at the Department of Justice interviewed this witness. You need to interview this witness immediately. Epstein should rot in hell, so should the men who patronized his operation. And as we sit here today, there are over 1,000 sex trafficking victims, and you have not held a single man accountable. Shame on you. If you had any decency, you would resign right after this hearing.
Several of Epstein's victims were seated behind Attorney General Pam Bondi at that hearing. At one point, survivors in the room were asked to stand and raise their hand if they had not been able to meet with the Justice Department. Every single one of them rose. The survivors are now demanding the full release of the files. In a time where survivors go up against the justice system and the system stands accused of defending their abusers, the question at the core of this story is a question of gendered justice. So I'm joined now by Janie Starling, founder of the campaign group Level Up. Janie, thank you for joining us here on MEE Live. Epstein survivors are demanding a full release of the files. They say redactions expose them and protect perpetrators. Does this reflect carelessness by the Department of Justice or a cover-up?
Well, the survivors are right, and there's been, whether it's careless or a cover-up, I can't confirm the intentionality, but what this has done is effectively sidelined and humiliated women who have suffered the most unimaginable, horrendous abuse. And it is hard not to see it as intentional. I think what this looks like is a classic case of power protecting itself, which is what we often see when men who hold huge power in society, whether they're state officials or millionaires or police officers, use their power to abuse women. They act as though they are above the law. And very often, sadly, that is the truth.
Now, what we're hearing again and again is that this isn't a question of the law, that the files don't show any wrongdoing. They show a lot of sleazy correspondence between Epstein and powerful famous men like Prince Andrew, former Prince Andrew, or Peter Mandelson. But no proof of criminality. Some men have lost titles. Some men have lost jobs. Some are being investigated for white-collar crimes. So is this all just a matter of gossip and scandal, or is it something more serious?
When we talk about sexual violence or sexual abuse as a society, there's this common misunderstanding where people get caught up on the word sex or sexual and they forget the violence and abuse part. And I think what we really need to see this as is violence. And I think when it comes to sexual violence in particular, just as with any violence, the goal is power and violence is the method. That's kind of how war and militaries operate, right? So this isn't about sex, it's about power and control. And what we know is the sexual violence and abuse is embedded across our society. It's not something that these incredibly powerful elites only do. It's in our families, it's in our communities. It's something that we don't often talk about, and the legal mechanisms that we have for dealing with it and the culture that we have, the silence that we have around this kind of abuse often prevents people from speaking out, and communities don't know how to deal with it. And I think what's really important is we don't focus on sexual abuse, sexual violence. It's violence and it's abuse. What's different here is the impunity with which it was done. From the emails, from the attachments, from the way that these men are all talking, they never thought they would ever be found out. They never thought that anyone would ever come across these documents. And what it reminds me of, funnily enough, is the undercover policing inquiry that's now going on, that there are still hearings ongoing every day at the moment, where women were violated by undercover police officers decades ago. And it's taken them so long to access any kind of hearing, let alone justice. And what we saw with the undercover policing inquiry was, again, men who were acting on behalf of the state, acting as though they were above the law. And again, the goal is power, violence is the method. We see it in the cases of reports of Israeli prison officers raping Palestinian men in prison. The goal is power, violence is the method. And I think we see it with footballers who, sexually violate women and then get their lawyers to issue them with NDAs, which stop them from speaking out. It's a very, very similar story. No one should have this much power in society. We shouldn't have billionaires with secret islands and yachts who are able to manipulate world leaders. It's a fundamentally corrupt system, and it's power that they were cementing in networks, which access to young girls and women helped facilitate. Ultimately, these were powerful men who were bonding over their shared violations of women and girls.
I mean, you talk about this corrupt system. The only person who has been convicted in association with the extensive trafficking, abuse and rape that survivors say occurred on Epstein's 2 Caribbean islands and elsewhere, the only person convicted in association with that is a woman, Ghislaine Maxwell. Presumably, she wasn't trafficking victims to be raped by no one. Why have none of the actual people who raped these women been charged or even identified?
What's really horrifying and is very painful to admit as someone who has worked on violence against women for my entire professional life is that there's nothing new about this. Rapists are very, very rarely identified or charged. In the UK, only 3% of rapes that are reported to the police even lead to a charge, let alone a trial, a conviction, or any kind of accountability. So I think what we have to also look at is the systems that are operating around this. We know that one of the first reports made about Epstein was in 1996, and police didn't take adequate action then. I think what we also need to look at is the frameworks that we have for accountability and for consequences that are not serving any women, not just the women and the girls involved in this, but any women at all. Because I think if we had much stronger frameworks for everybody, then we could have something that could be used in this instance. And I do think, you know, as much as all of the world leaders and the names that have appeared in the files need to be held to account, we also need to recognize that there has been so much failure on the part of the police to actually do something about these claims. And I mean, you know, in the UK, there's been scandal after scandal of the police themselves abusing women. There was an investigation that found over a 5-year period, over 300 officers were reported for rape, 500 for sexual assault, which averages out to roughly 1 officer accused of rape every single week. I think the biggest
That's
thing
a shocking
from
statistic.
all of this, it's shocking, it's disgusting, and unless you really work in the criminal legal system or around it, you might not realize it. I think what's really important for us to remember here is that this is indicative of a broader conversation we desperately need to have in society, and whether people are criminally held accountable or not, we can all play a part in making sure that we use this cultural moment to change the way that society responds to sexual abuse, to change the way that we understand sexual violence, where we don't get caught up on sex or sex acts or salacious details, but we focus on the fact it's violence, it's about power and control. And in my opinion, justice in this instance is something that everybody can take part in. It's having conversations about child sexual abuse and the prevalence of it. It's understanding how to respond with disclosures and believing survivors when they speak out. And ultimately, stopping this culture of silence we have around this and making sure that legal officials are held to account, that the police do their job. And, you know, as Baroness Casey said in her review of the Met Police, if they can't, they need to be abolished and something put in its place. Maybe we need a separate body for dealing with violence against women and girls if the institutions and the frameworks that we have simply are not serving women and they are not keeping anyone safe.
Janie, there has been masses of coverage, and there will be masses more coverage as journalists continue to pick through over 3 million files. It's hard, I suppose, to isolate what we should be taking away from what is unfolding before us. As an advocate for survivors of sexual violence, as you say, emphasizing the violence, what to you is the main story of the Epstein files?
The story here is that survivors have been sidelined in a conversation that has become about men's careers. And we all have a role to play in overturning that. And justice means we all take a part in changing the culture that we have around sexual violence and abuse, particularly child sexual abuse, because it's not monsters who are doing it over there. It's people in family homes, in our communities, within our personal networks. That's where we have control over the conversation, and that's where the conversation needs to be had.
Janie Starling, thank you so much for joining us on MEE Live. For today, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform, or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday. See you then.